Please do not leave the king in the center in the opening. If you do, you will lose without much of a fight and it will not really be enjoyable. We should always get the king to one of the flanks so that our rooks are connected and also our king is not left in the center to get attacked. Let's take a look at what happens if someone does not abide by this opening principle. So in this game we have a Slav defense. White plays e3, solidifying the center, trying to develop the bishop to d3. This has the downside of the bishop being a little bit blocked, but it might come out eventually. a6 by black, this has some ideas of playing b5, knight c3, b5, and b3. White keeps attention in the center. Now if black ever takes here, this pawn might become vulnerable to moves like queen a4, and also the b file is not necessarily in black's favor. So bishop g4 by black. Black wants to play e6, but he wants to develop the bishop first so that it does not get blocked. And white plays this modest move, bishop d2. He could play h3, but bishop f3, queen f3. Now black has this interesting active continuation with e5, sacrificing a pawn. And if white takes it, then bishop to b4. Now black creates very big threats of bishop takes c3, also forcing the king and the rook. For example, if white takes this knight, then now black takes the piece back and he will also win the rook on a1. So if, for example, bishop d2, black shouldn't move the knight again, he can take here and then move the knight to the new e4 square, attacking the bishop again. And the bishop has to move to b4, and after b takes c4, black can continue with either queen b6 or c5 and knight c6. And even though white has the bishop pair, black has somewhat of an initiative, and he can be quite happy with the opening. So instead, this is why white played the move bishop d2 to prevent ideas of bishop b4. So black plays e6, h3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and now white has gained the bishop pair, but black has quite a solid structure on the light squares, and the black can hope to fight in the long term. Bishop knight b2 d7, bishop d3, bishop b4, and white castles. White has connected the rooks and the finished development, and here black should castle as well, after which something like rook fc1 might happen. The play will mostly happen on the queen side, and white enjoys a slight long-term advantage because of the bishop pair, and which in the long term might be quite useful. Also e4 is an idea. At some point white might open the center with c takes d5, or maybe even close it with c5. Time will tell. But instead black plays this move queen e7, which is very ambitious. Black might want to be stopping a3, and he also has some ideas of e5, but his king is left in the center, at least for the moment, and if black gets time, he will castle. So white has to play very actively, and he does this by the precise move c takes d5. And white realizes that since black is not castled, this rook on a8 is not defended, which it would be if black had castled. And now black should recapture with the e-pawn, but this is very ugly because it leaves the c6 pawn very weak, and the white can play quite actively. He can play with the simple idea of rook fc1, eventually piling up on the c-pawn, but he can be even more active with a3, attacking the bishop. Now the bishop cannot take this pawn, because after, for example, e4, white is threatening to take here, and if black takes here, now the center is getting opened up with the king here. Black is in time to castle, but after bishop g5, this pin is extremely annoying. This queen is also tied to the bishop, and for example, if the bishop moves, white can at any point take back his pawn on c6, leaving a weakness on a6. For example, knight takes f6, and white can play rook fc1, and after h6, we shouldn't double the pawns here because the endgame with opposite colored bishops would be quite drawish. Instead, bishop h4 can be played, and white will regain a pawn in a few seconds, and then white will be attacking on the king side with ideas of bishop takes f6 or rook takes f6 as well. So instead, after the move a3, black should just give up the bishop here to not lose any more time, After bishop takes c3. Now if black castles, there is the skewer tactic bishop to b4, winning the exchange. So black has to play this move a5, wasting another move, but he will be in time to castle. The position is quite sad for black, as white has the two bishops and the weakness to attack on c6, so it will be a very cheerless defense. So instead black took back with the c-pawn, which is of course more natural, taking towards the center and not leaving a weakness on c6. But now white keeps up the pressure and does not allow black to castle. a4, a very nice move. Attacking the queen side, now the threat is to take the pawn on b5, which is attacked 3 times and defended only once. So this doesn't leave black time to castle. Black takes, the rook gets activated. Now the pawn on a6 is attacked, so if black castles he will have to give up a pawn. So black plays a5, and it seems like white's initiative is over, but you can pause the video and try to figure out yourself what white played here. I will give you a few seconds, and we can take a look at what white played. White played the great move knight takes d5, a tactical shot, and this takes a pawn which seemingly is defended a lot of times, but the tactics work out because of the undefended rook on a8. So here the queen is attacked, so black really has to take one way or another, otherwise everything is dropping. So black took back with the pawn. Let's take a look at what happens if the knight takes back. This looks logical to defend the bishop on b4, but now due to the undefended rook on a8, both the a-pawn and the knight on d5 are both pinned, so bishop takes b4 is winning. Now white has won a pawn, he might win another one. He also has still the bishop pair. The knight cannot take because of the rook on a8, and the pawn can also not take because of the same rook, and the queen cannot take because the bishop is defended by the rook, so that would lose a queen. So black takes back with the pawn, and now similarly bishop takes b4, and black cannot take back because of the undefended rook on a8, and black is completely lost. Queen d8 is played, another rook joins the game, the a-pawn is doomed, queen b6. Notice how this bishop is extremely well placed to stop black from castling, and as long as black does not castle, he is not only a pawn down, he is also a whole rook down, as the rook is completely out of the game. Queen d1 happens, white remaneuvers the queen to the queen side, rook b8, bishop takes a5, the pawns get exchanged, but opening lines on the queen side is only favorable to white. Bishop c2, white does not want to exchange queens at this moment. Queen to b7, rook b1, one rook is exchanged, so now we can see the pieces which are playing, 4 pieces for white, 3 pieces for black, and this rook on h8 is unfortunately not in the game. And you can pause the video and figure out what move white played that made black resign. I will again give you a few seconds to pause the video and think, and let's take a look at what happened. The last move of the game, bishop to b4. And this move is very powerful because again black cannot castle, the bishop is defending the f8 square. White has simple threats such as queen a1 alongside with rook a8. The bishop can come out to f5 or somewhere else, and not to mention white is a pawn ahead and he has the clear target on b5, so the position is completely hopeless for black. And this is a picturesque ending, as even at the end of the game black cannot castle and he is forced to resign. So let's take a look at another example. Here we are going to look at the black side, d4, knight f6, and this time we have the Catalan opening, and white is planning to put his bishop on g2 and basically try to fight against the development of the bishop on c8. So black takes this pawn. This is one of the ways to play. White will get this pawn back, but in the meantime it will take some time to do this. Bishop g2 and knight c6. Black is developing. Queen e4, trying to get the pawn back. Bishop b4 creates some difficulties in getting the pawn back. Bishop d2 attacks the bishop. Black involves the knight in the game. Takes, knight c3, bishop d7. And now usually what white does here is to take back the pawn, to castle the king to the king side, and eventually white will play either knight d2 or queen b5, either way getting back the pawn on c4, and usually white can enjoy a comfortable game in such positions. Instead, white plays the move knight to e5, and white is trying to get back the pawn in swift order. Unfortunately, since the white king is left in the center, white will now be punished, and you can pause the video to find the punishment yourself. I will give you a few seconds. And let's take a look at what happened in the game. The brilliant move by black, knight d3, is played. The point being that at this moment, if black takes this knight, it looks like white cannot recapture because the white queen is attacked, but the queen will take this knight on b4, and currently this knight is attacked, and this pawn on b7 is attacked, and this pawn on c4 is also attacked. So white is doing quite well here. Black can also try this, knight takes d4, with the idea that if white takes this knight, now this is a nice fork, a family fork on c2. But instead white can take the bishop on d7, after which white is doing quite well. So instead knight d3 was played, and this is a very strong move, sacrificing the knight to gain the d3 square. And now white took back with the knight. He cannot really take with the pawn because now after knight takes e5, the material is equal, black is even a pawn ahead. White cannot take here as this is defended. The queen is attacked, and after the queen moves anywhere, knight takes d3 will happen with check. Black will win even another pawn, leaving the weakness on d4 and also attacking the king, and after the check it will be forced to move and it will not have castling rights anymore, which means black will just be completely winning. So instead knight to d3 happens, black takes back, and now white plays e3. Here white is lucky that he is not yet losing. If he takes this pawn, then the material is equal but black's structure is horrible. Black can even just castle and enjoy an advantage here because of the terribly weak d4 pawn as well as the very weak d3 square and pawn. So instead e3 happens. White has the idea of slowly picking up this pawn and then enjoying a solid structure, but black will not allow this. e5, a very strong move, creating more tension in the center. Now the very direct threat is knight takes d4, because the pawn will not have time to recapture because of the discovered attack on the queen. Also now the queen will not be able to capture the knight because of the pawn on e5. D takes e5 by white, and now black castles. Here black is not in a hurry to take the pawn back, and white plays queen e4. Perhaps white could castle, but now after knight takes e5, black has a strong passed pawn on d3. This is an extra pawn. Black also has the majority on the queen side, which means that not only does he have a passed pawn, this pawn can become supported by another connected passed pawn in the near future. So queen e4 happens, and now black plays a brilliant move, which is d2 check. So the pawn is ready to sacrifice itself for the future, and currently it is going to cause some chaos in the center. Now the king will be forced to move, and it was not in time to castle. The king goes to e2. This is of course not ideal because of bishop f5, a discovered attack on the queen. This does not yet lose the queen, as white can play queen d5, but after queen e7, the rook and the queen are lined up on the same file. Black will get very easy development for the rooks. After knight e5, he will not even be down in material, so black is close to winning. Instead, king e2 happens. White still has hopes of now castling by hand, which means playing the rook out and then bringing the king back to the king side. Rook e8, attacking the pawn on e5, f4, bishop g4 check, and the king f2. Instead of bishop g4, even better was the move f6, opening up the center while the king is in the center, creating tension here. For example, queen d5, bishop e6. Even offering a queen trade is quite favorable, because after a position such as this, all of black's pieces are centralized. There are threats of bishop c4 or bishop g4, as well as, for example, after this, there are simple tactics like knight d4 with a fork using the pinned e3 square, e3 pawn I mean. So white is in huge trouble. After queen takes d2, for example, black can play this move bishop c4, and after king d1, and black has a lot of continuations which promise him the initiative. Since the white king is stuck in the center, he can hope to bring the rook here, for example queen e7, or he can even leave the queens off the board with knight b4, attacking with knight d3 next, and black is in the driver's seat. Instead, bishop g4 happens, which is also quite a fine move. King f2, queen d7 developing the last pieces, and this king has not castled, which means the rooks are still in the corners. This pawn on d2 is still alive, and it is very annoying. Queen d5 and the rook a d8. Black does not mind a queen trade, as he thinks that if white takes here, then this pawn might promote to d8, to d1 I mean, alongside with this bishop. At this moment there is a big threat of d1. For example, after h3, black can give up his strong pawn with the idea to play rook to d2, and this will win a piece, either the knight on d1 or the bishop on g2. So instead white plays h3 right here, and now black moves the queen, attacking the queen of white. Queen e4, bishop e6, rook hd1, white finally gets his pieces in the game. Queen c5, and black still has the initiative. This pawn is still alive. Queen to b1, trying to get the knight to e4, hopefully picking up this pawn, and black plays queen b6. And this is prophylaxis against the knight going to e4 and then perhaps to g5. Now knight e4 will not happen with tempo. There were also other tempting continuations. For example, knight b4 to bring a knight towards the game with knight d3. For example, knight e4, queen b6, and after rook takes d2, knight to d3 keeps the initiative. White will likely take on the e3 next if the king goes to g1. If the king goes to f3, then black is in the driving seat with threats like bishop f5, lining up ideas on the queen on b1 as well. For example, if the knight moves, knight takes c5 is simply winning, as it's a discover check on the queen. So instead, queen b6 happened to not allow knight e4 with a tempo. Bishop takes c6. Here, for example, if knight e4, black can again try to open up the position with f6. This also stops knight to g5. And after ef, bishop f7. Now the big threat is to go bishop g6 and try to get the knight off of the e4 square. And if white takes here, it seems like black is the one kind of in trouble. But after knight b4, the queen protects the square on f6, so knight f6 is not a problem. And the next moves might be knight d3, bishop g6, and black is winning. So instead, bishop takes c6 happens. Now this bishop gets lost, and after queen c6, the unopposed light squared bishop will be quite annoying. Queen e4, white desperately wants to trade queens. Black does not accept it. And after queen c2, black takes this pawn on h3, and this allows the bishop to go to g4 later. Even stronger was again the move f6 to break up the pawns and attack the e3 square. But bishop takes h3 is also fine. Now finally white gets this pawn on d2, but now the white king has other problems. Queen to c6 is threatening queen g2, which would be very painful. e4 happens, blocking the diagonal, and bishop g4. Black wants to keep the queens on the board. He is trying to play queen h6 next, to play queen h2 and continue the attack. After knight d5, queen h6 happens, and the rook g1. But now the rook is in trouble. As we will see, king g1 should have been played, and black has the initiative, but white can still fight on. The material is equal, and white has his own ideas of using the h-file. Instead, rook g1 happens, Now queen h2 check, the rook blocks, queen h1, now the queen has infiltrated, now rook g1 does not really work because of queen to f3. So instead, one idea for white is to play knight e3, bishop h3, rook g1, and here, after rook takes d2 with check, getting the queen off of the e4 square, black is able to take this pawn on e4, and now black is a pawn ahead, and he is also attacking. So this should give him a winning position. Instead, queen takes c7 happens. Black now starts using his bishop as well as the queen, and this king is in serious trouble. And here, in time trouble, white played the move knight e7, which does not really work out, but it is quite difficult. A bit more tenacious was king to f3. Now, if black takes the rook, which he should, he will be an exchange up, but this knight on d5 is actually quite strong. Rook f2, queen d3, and for example knight e3, rook d7, queen c4. White can try to exchange the queens, and even though white does have decent compensation as he has a pawn and pretty active squares for his pieces, black should win in any case. But now knight e7 happens, and black had to calculate this in advance, and this does work out. King goes to f8, we cannot take because of checkmate, so king f8 attacking the knight, rook takes d8, and this looks very threatening, but black has his own play, which is coming with checks, so queen takes g2, then queen takes g3, then queen takes f4, king d3, bishop f1, and after king c2 there is queen takes e4, and after king d2, finally black plays the move queen to b4, and then picks up the knight on e7 like this, and white does not really have anything. He has lost all of his things with check, and after king takes e8, white decides to resign as he is down a bunch of material and time control has been reached. So this was another interesting example of what happens when we don't castle in time. Our opponent can swiftly punish us, and we cannot really be always prepared for every complication. So instead we should castle as soon as we have the chance, as a general rule, so that we don't end up like the players in this game. So hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully you learned a bit about the principle of not leaving the king in the center and castling as soon as possible.